Well, it's interesting to be a travel writer talking about politics. And what's the deal? Why would a travel writer even have anything to say about politics? Well, it's occurred to me since about 9/12 that the role of a travel writer needs to be like the court jester in the Middle Ages. You know, in the Middle Ages, the kings were ruling, and the court jester would go out there and goof around in the puddle and the gutter with everybody, and he was welcome to come back into the court and tell the king the truth. And the king didn't kill him. The king needed to know that. And it feels today that a lot of people can't come home and say what they learn outside of our country. And as a travel writer, I feel like that's my challenge, and I just feel like it's the role of an honest travel writer in this day and age. Now, why do I even care? Well, you know, when you travel, if you're halfway awake, it's a broadening experience. My most valuable, poignant travel experience, I think, happened on my very first trip. I was a 14-year-old in Oslo with my parents visiting relatives in Norway. And we were behind the palace in that Frogner Park. And I remember it like it was yesterday. That park is a vast park filled with all of these great concrete and statues. And it took me a little while to get over the concrete nudity. And then I was able to realize that my parents were just loving me so much. And I remember looking out on that park, and I can see it like it's yesterday, just speckled like a Monet painting with all these other parents loving their kids. And it occurred to me in that 14-year-old mentality, wow, those parents love their kids as much as my parents love me. And it just hit me, this world is home to billions of equally lovable children of God. I mean, it was a mind blower. And I've been thinking about that ever since in my travels. When I see a God Bless America sticker, I just think, as opposed to what? You know, it's just because I've been over there and I saw these Norwegian kids loved by their parents. I've spent a third of my adult life living out of a suitcase, a 9 by 22 by 14-inch suitcase, overseas. A third of my adult life, talking to people who see things different than me. And it makes me a little bit of an odd duck. So when I come home, I've got one foot here and one foot there a little bit. It's an interesting position to be in. And lately, I look out and I see there's a lot of wisdom overseas that we don't take advantage of. I see my country more isolated than ever. I see a lot of fear in our society. I can't believe all the fear. 75 years ago this month, Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to teach us we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And now we're even using fear against us for people's interest. And I found in my travels that the flip side of fear is understanding. Why am I not afraid of something when somebody else is? Because I've traveled and I understand that it's really not worth being afraid of. Maybe I'm just being duped, maybe I'm naive, but I believe that you can undo fear by better understanding. When you travel, you understand this wide gap between the rich and the poor on this planet, and it's not always comfortable for us to deal with it honestly. But I'm tired of embracing lies. I want to deal with it. It's not a guilt trip, it's just a reality. There's a huge gap. Our country is so crazed about national security. And I really believe if you're concerned about national security, you got to start thinking out of the box here, because ironically, we're doing everything wrong for national security with a passion. And I find there are powerful people in our society that would find it convenient if we were all just dumbed down. And I don't want to be dumbed down. If they say go shopping, I say no. Why do you want me to go shopping? You see? So we need to expect each other to be smarted up. Now, it's a little awkward for me to call a gathering like this and tell you what it's like, because I honestly don't think I have answers. I just really care, and I believe you care, and I think we believe we can do better. And I'm lucky, the advantage I have is I've traveled a lot and I've been challenged, and that's what I want to talk about today. Because travel has shaped my worldview, and when I come home, I find myself really a citizen of the planet as well as a citizen of this country. That is making travel a political act. So today I just want to talk about how that happened and why I think it's important. I never wanted to go to Europe in the beginning. My parents dragged me to Europe. I wanted to stay home and play with my friends. I was over in Norway, 14-year-old kid with a bad attitude. And then on about day 2, it occurred to me, you know, it's not that bad. Different candy, different pop. One-armed bandits in the hotel lobbies, I could gamble. Statuesque women with hairy armpits. Whoa! It was a wonderland for this little 14-year-old kid. And when I got over there, I realized, this could be a lot of fun to travel. Now, I traveled again with my parents. My dad imported pianos from Germany, and we had to visit the relatives in Norway. And I remember on that second trip, I was in the train station in Copenhagen with my mom and dad, surrounded by kids a couple years older than me with rucksacks and rail passes, not a parent in sight, and Europe was their playground. It was their backyard. It was recess. And I remember it vividly, exciting destinations clicking up on that reader board. Amsterdam, Berlin, Helsinki. And I remember seeing those kids, and they were so free. And I remember looking at my mom and dad thinking, I don't need you guys for this. Europe is my playground. Just give me a rail pass and a plane ticket, I'm out of here. And I've vowed to go back to Europe every year after that, and I have. For the first 3 or 4 trips, it was just purely for kicks. I was a piano teacher. Kids wouldn't practice in the summer. Let's not push it. I'm going to Europe. I'll see you in September. Have a nice summer. And after a few trips, it occurred to me, I'm learning from my mistakes. I was becoming a pretty darn good traveler. I was on a very tight budget, and I was traveling smooth, and it occurred to me Europe is better organized for travel than the United States, much more variety and much more exciting opportunities, I thought, for travelers. And what was just as clear as me learning from my mistakes, other people were making precisely the same mistakes I made the year before, and having to learn from their own experience. And I thought, what a shame. What if I could just package the lessons I've learned from my mistakes into a class or a guidebook or something like this, and people could learn from my mistakes rather than their own, have a better trip, and I would have a good excuse to go back to Europe every summer and update my material. So that's what I've been doing ever since then, is going over there and making all the mistakes, taking careful notes, losing my traveler's checks just to see what'll happen. Working up a big thirst after a long day of sightseeing in Naples, coming back to the hotel asking for a margarita and getting a pizza. You make these mistakes and you learn from them. So this is what I do professionally, is I go over there and I make mistakes and I take careful notes, and other people learn from my mistakes, and I get to go again next year and update my material. So I struggled as a kid. I was idealistic. I wanted to do one thing and I wanted to do it well, and I wanted to work hard and contribute. And I was thinking, is it really noble for me to teach wealthy Americans to go travel? Is that a good thing? Because my idea of travel when I was a kid, I don't know if you remember this, but when I was a kid, my very first memories of travel was rich Americans on fancy cruise ships in the Caribbean, on the deck, throwing coins off the deck so they could photograph what they called the little dark kids jumping for the coins, And they'd come home and they'd show these photographs. Wow, I'm so powerful, they'll jump for my nickels. Isn't this cool? And I just thought, that's not a good kind of travel. I didn't want to promote that. Even today, that notion of travel persists. I believe for a lot of Americans, travel is still see if you can eat 5 meals a day and still snorkel when you get into port. Well, to me, that's not good travel. Now, when I say that at a cruise convention, people fidget nervously. But I'm not judging it. I'm not condemning it at all. I just say it's not travel. It's hedonism. And I don't say that in a judgmental way either. I got no problem with hedonism. I'm a Lutheran. But travel should bring us together. That's the beautiful thing about travel, and what I've done right from the start, kind of without even knowing it until just a few years ago, is travel and encourage people to travel in a way that connects us with the rest of the planet. To me, that's exciting. And that's what we do at Europe Through the Back Door. So as you know today when you've been at this travel show, that we've got a staff of 80 people, and we love to go over there and travel and organize, learn all the information we can, organize it, design the information, and then help people learn from our mistakes rather than their own so they can travel smoother. The big turn on for me as a travel writer is to find the magic of travel and let people experience it. And there's all different kinds of magic of travel. One of the most encouraging things for me ever is to see kids one generation behind me over there as teenagers on a shoestring, wide-eyed and in wonder of the world, having the same magical experiences I had. They got more money, they got cell phones, they got the internet, they got all these conveniences, but the fundamental magic of travel is still there. And that's just so fun for me as a travel writer to know my experiences written in a journal 30 years ago are just as applicable today for kids who are over there with their boyfriend or their girlfriend having that great first trip. There's magic of all kinds, natural magic. I mean, for me, the natural wonders of Europe are, we got great natural wonders here, but those in Europe are so accessible. I mean, imagine walking on a ridge high in the Alps for 3 hours, tight roping on this ridge. On one side, you got lakes stretching all the way to Germany. On the other side, you got the most incredible alpine panorama anywhere, the Eiger, Monch, and Jungfrau, cut glass peaks, and ahead of you hear the long legato tones of an Alp horn. announcing that the helicopter-stocked mountain hut is open, it's just around the corner, and the coffee schnapps is on. Whoa, that is a great experience, and that's what people can have, and it just makes them excited about nature. In your travels, you get these cultural wonders. I mean, I love being the cultural bumpkin. And I'll warn you, a lot of us Americans are a little put off by those sophisticates in Europe, those pseudo-sophisticates. They're so into their wine and cheese and everything. I celebrate it. I'm into different things. They're into different things. I'm a bumpkin. I was raised thinking cheese is orange in the shape of the bread. Here, cheese sandwich. Over there, cheese is not orange in the shape of the bread. There's a different cheese for every day of the year. These people are evangelical about their cheese. And I love it when my favorite restaurateur in Paris, Marie-Alice, takes me shopping in the morning and shows me what's going to shape the menu tonight. And I'm her favorite little cultural bumpkin. I don't know diddly. I'm just from the northwest of the United States, you know? And she turns me on with all this great sophisticated cuisine stuff, takes me into a cheese shop. It's a festival of mold. She picks the moldiest wad. It's the grossest hunk of stuff you could ever see, and she takes a deep whiff. Oh, Rick, smell this cheese. It smells like the feet of angels. All right, Marie-Elise, whatever turns you on, you know? And I go with it, and I'm impressed by the way they're excited about this or that or whatever. You know, my dad's really into pianos. He goes to the fanciest piano factory over there, and we find that in Vienna, they don't produce pianos, they birth them, kind of, you know? Each one's got its own personality. Maybe this is one of my reasons I'm really tuned into the fine points of European culture and fine life. I remember going over there on those first trips with my dad. He was a piano tuner here in Seattle, and he imported these fine pianos. He knew the personality of his clients. He would fly to Vienna back in the late 60s and early 70s, and he would line up a bunch of these grand pianos in Vienna, the most expensive, greatest pianos in the world, and I'd get to play them, and my dad would analyze the personality, and he would match the personality with his client here in Seattle, and he'd autograph the sounding board, they'd put it in a box and ship it over here. I mean, that's the kind of quality of Europe culture that is pretty much gone by the wayside in our mass-produced culture these days. But that's that culture you can get turned on with in Europe. And there's history. I mean, you know, I got a history degree, and back when I got my history degree, I thought I better get a business degree so I can have something of use. I have learned in the last few years that if more people had a history degree and thought about it, we'd be a lot better off. You can learn so much from history. I tell you, there's this big, you know, conflict, this crusade, or whatever people want to call it, between Christendom and Islam. There's nothing new, and it's nothing we can't overcome, but we've got to understand the roots of it, and that there's not a simplistic, they're bad, we're good. You go to Spain today, and in almost every church, in a lot of churches in southern Spain, you find a statue of this guy. His name is St. James the Moor Killer, St. James the Muslim Killer. And they go there in the church every Sunday and they worship. And here you got James on a horse with the cut-off heads of Muslims all around him in a Christian church in 2000, in the 21st century. I mean, that's poignant. You go to that great church today and it's built on the ruins of a mosque, which is built on the ruins of a church, which is built on the ruins of a Roman temple, which was built on a ruin of an earlier pagan ground, you see, a holy ground. It's complicated. It's complicated. I love the thought of Europe uniting and Europe just having this pride and getting its act together. And when we travel in Europe today, we have that opportunity to see history as it's unfolding, and we can be part of it. And that's something a lot of travelers don't give themselves opportunity to do or credit to do. I was in Germany, in Berlin, on the opening week of their brand new Reichstag building, the Parliament building. And, you know, Germany united, the government goes from Bonn back to Berlin, and in good European style, they don't bulldoze the bombed out hulk of the destroyed from the World War II Parliament building there that was on the no man's land on Berlin Wall, you know. They renovate it because it's got roots into their culture, and they incorporate a modern architectural design into it, and they open it up to the people. Free, open almost all the time, and designed for people to go. Well, when you look at this glorious glass dome, it's designed for the Germans to go up that ramp to the very top and literally look down over the shoulders of their legislators to see what's going on in their desk. They've been jerked around too much by their politicians in the last century, and they're not going to let it happen again. Powerful architectural symbolism for the new German Capitol building for the new united Germany. This is government by the people and for the people. I was on top of that dome on the opening week, surrounded by teary-eyed Germans. Anytime you're surrounded by teary-eyed Germans, something exceptional is going on. And it occurred to me, most of those teary eyes were old enough to remember the difficult times either during or after World War II when their city laid in rubble. And what an exciting moment for these people. The opening of this grand building was the symbolic closing of a difficult chapter in the history of a great nation. No more division, no more communism, no more fascism. A united government entering a new century with a new Capitol building looking into a promising future. Whoa, it was exciting to be there. I was caught up in it. And I looked around at the other American tourists up there, and it occurred to me not one of them had a clue what was going on. It saddened me. They were so interested in their batteries and their Coke and the air conditioning, all these little trivial things. They didn't miss what was happening, and they had this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to celebrate that with the German people. And it saddened me. I thought, I don't want to be in a dumbed-down society. That's what I thought when I looked at those people. I was disappointed in them. They're my countrymen, and they just didn't have it up here enough to notice what was happening. And I thought they're victims of a society that wants us to be dumbed down. Tourism. They just want you to have fun in the sun. They don't want you to think about it. Duty-free shopping, frequent flyer miles, what's the power of your suntan lotion, bingo, shopping, you know, carry-on allotments, all of this stuff that's distracting you from the real reason to travel that we so vitally need these days. And I think across the board in our society, people want us to be dumbed down. What did they do? They just made the president of Reader's Digest the president of public broadcasting. Geez, that should blow a whistle. One Reader's Digest is enough for any society. Why do they find public broadcasting so threatening? Because it wants us to be smarted up instead of dumbed down. It's inconvenient if we want to really get into stuff. We need to expect our neighbors to be smarted up. In my own realm as a travel teacher, if I've got the opportunity to lead a tour, write a guidebook, or make a TV show, it's going to come with an expectation that my viewers, my travelers, are engaged, not dumbed down. I go to these travel shows all over the country. Everything's a celebration of dumbed downness these days, and it's maddening because we're confronted with some pretty serious challenges. And if you're going to let them figure it out, I would say you deserve the consequences, but there's lots of innocent people that don't deserve the consequences that are going to reap the benefits of that kind of neglect as well. When you travel, you meet people like you would never meet at home. I love it. I meet more people in 2 months in Europe, I think, that are different and interesting than I meet in a whole year here, because here we surround ourselves with people like ourselves. It's just a normal thing to do. You go to Europe and you are encountering people that you wouldn't normally sit next to on the bus and so on. I think it's a rich opportunity. They don't need to be big life-changing encounters, goofy little stuff. I met this kid, he was staring at me. It was rude. Finally his dad said, "Excuse my son, he stares at Americans." He said, last week we were at McDonald's, he was having his hamburger, and he said, "Dad, why do Americans have such soft bread?" And the dad said, "Because Americans have no teeth." Now, I don't think the dad was getting at anything. I think he was just being goofy and kind of entertaining himself. But now the poor kid's confused, and he looks at American tourists to see if they have teeth, and I had to show him mine. You meet all sorts of fun people in your travels. One of my favorite countries is Ireland, because in Ireland I have the sensation that I'm understanding a foreign language. It's a horrible shame that I speak only English, but you go to Ireland, not only do you feel like you're understanding a foreign language, but people there have the gift of gab. They love to talk, and it's an art form. Why is it such an art form? I think it's probably because if they don't speak Irish, Old Irish as their first language, it's ingrained in them, but that's the structure of their way of communicating, and I think it's more poetic and fun than our English structure. And we don't realize that they're talking to each other in Gaelic, and then you step in and they turn to you and talk in English. We think they talk English all the time, but they think and dream in Gaelic. And then you get caught up in these conversations way over there on the west coast of Ireland, where they say the next parish over is Boston. And you're talking to this guy. This is a Gaeltacht. It's a national preserve for the traditional cultures. The government decides, even at the expense of good business, that they will subsidize the continued existence of the traditional lifestyle because it's part of their heritage. And they've got this treasure that they're keeping alive. And you go over there and you get involved in these great conversations with these guys. It's very hard for me to keep my busy itinerary when I'm in Ireland because people are so charming. They got all the time in the world to talk, and they're entertaining in their discussions. I was talking to this guy, and after a while I said, "Were you born here?" And he said, "No, it was about 5 miles down the road." Later on I asked him, "Have you lived here all your life?" He said, "Not yet." just fun interactions that you get with people, and that really carbonates your experience. When I'm doing a tour, or if I'm writing a guidebook or making a TV show, if I'm not connecting people with people, it's going to be a flat experience. I'm desperate. I've got to connect people with people. Now, as a travel teacher, one of the big issues these days is the unification of Europe. Think of what's happened in the last decade or so. As Europe is united, 300 million people have the same coins in their pocket, the euro. Now, what's with this European Union? Well, Europe is creating a free trade zone to compete with the United States. You got a free trade zone in Europe of 400 million people with an economy of $13 trillion. To put that into relative terms, here in the United States, we're 300 million people with an economy of $13 trillion. We got the same size economy, they got more people. You'll hear Americans who are proponents of our system put down the European system because they don't make as much money as we do. Look at it. They got more people and they make the same amount of money. They make less money per person than we do. Well, that's true. They make less money per person. But there's no question they make the same or more per hour than we do. They just choose to work less hours. Europeans have a different work ethic. It's not good for business. If you have a system that's business friendly, it's bad news. But over there, it's for people. I've got a friend here in the United States who's running a very small movement called Take Back Your Time. And it's sort of trying to tell Americans, we got the shortest vacation in the rich world, and it's getting worse. And he reminds us that by his estimate, if you were a European working as hard as we work, October 24th would be your last day to go to work. That's why that's his national holiday, October 24th. It's just kind of thought-provoking. But don't tell anybody, let anybody tell you their system is a basket case economically. They, by their estimate, I'm not saying what's right and wrong, I'm just saying they like to work less and live more. And they make, 25% less than we do, and they work 25% less than we do. Now, Europe is uniting, and that's the whole idea. They want a free trade zone because they got to compete with us, and they've created that free trade zone with the European Union. I want to remind you, Europe is no, fantasy land. I'm aware of that. They've got all sorts of serious problems. A lot of people, because I go to Europe and I come home and I kind of encourage Americans to get their act together, I'm not saying we're bad and they're good. I'm just learning from them and encouraging us to learn from that and do a little better if we can. I don't think Europe's perfect by any means, and Europe has a lot of economic problems. I'll tell you one thing, I'd hate to run my business in Europe. I'd much rather run it here. I could never have the fun with my business in Europe that I have here because we've got this wonderful freewheeling economic system that's sort of part of our strength economically. Europe has a very difficult situation right now with its geriatric future. There's fewer young people and more old people than ever in Europe, and the prognosis is horrible for Europe. And you'll see a lot of demonstrations on the street these days because in Europe, you can't work all your life hoping to have the same luxurious cradle-to-grave welfare security that your dad had and you've been promised in your work, and all of a sudden they tell you, no, you can't have it. It's very difficult to take away these entitlements in the United States and in Europe. The fact is, in the old days, lots of young people, a few old people, they could support that, right? Now, a few young people, lots of old people, it just is economically, the equation's not there. And it's going to take very, very difficult work for politicians to tell people you can't have the goodies, and the local people are going to be striking, and out on the streets you're going to see a lot of demonstrations as Europe grapples with this new reality. Europe also has lots of problems with racism and with immigration. The whole immigration problem in Europe is like any nation that brings in poor people to do the work they don't want to do. If you're rich enough to have some person from Mexico clean your house, you're going to do it. If you don't want to spend enough money for apples to have rich kids of yours pick the apples, you'll hire people that'll work cheaper. That's just the honest truth. That's what gastarbeiters are all about. We've got them. There's 100,000 Polish people working in Ireland now, gastarbeiters, because Ireland is rich and Poland wants work. Germany's filled with Turks. France is filled with Algerians. It's all gastarbeiters. Rich, generally white people, don't want to do the dirty work. They hire poor people to do it for them. It comes with a bigger cost than your cheap labor, because now you've got an immigrant community you need to assimilate into your society. And the problem I see in Europe is the immigrant communities don't want to assimilate. It's a diaspora. They want to squat in that more comfortable country and keep their culture from home because of the modern communication opportunities and so on. They could do it. You've got third-generation Algerian families in the Netherlands that don't speak a word of Dutch and don't expect their children to either. That's a problem, and that's what Europe is dealing with. It's an awkward thing to talk about, but boy, it's going to be a tough one for Europe. I'm sorry?
What was that?
Diaspora.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Gastarbeiter. That's the German. That's the German word for guest worker. Yeah. So it's almost a generic term because the Germans were the famous first ones when they were rich back in the 70s. They imported a lot of Turkish labor, and the Turks were all called Gastarbeiters. I got friends who were there that said, "Ich bin ein Gastarbeiter, ich arbeite in Deutschland für 2 Jahre." You know, I could function in Turkey because so many Turks didn't speak English in the old days. They spoke German because they all went to Germany to make some serious money and then went back home. Yeah. A few years ago, on one day, 10 nations joined the European Union. And suddenly, the geographic center of Europe shifted from Belgium to about Czech Republic. And all of a sudden, you got 100 million new people or something in the European Union. And boy, I tell you, it's exciting to see what's going on in Eastern Europe today. They are so excited about their freedom and their new opportunity to work hard and make money. They're having less kids and more cars. They're just embracing the whole American kind of work ethic with gusto. And it's fun to see it. When you remember the old days, when I first went to Poland, it was so bleak, so gray, so demoralizing, because they had this clueless command economy from the Soviet Union where they didn't have supply and demand entering into the equation. Somebody just had to say how many of this to get and how many of that to get. Well, it was just a fiasco. I remember when I first went to Poland, people were taking in their windshield wipers with them at night because they forgot to order windshield wipers, and the thieves knew it. You'd rip off somebody's windshield wipers, sell it for a fortune on the black market because nobody could get windshield wipers. Well, now they're leaving their windshield wipers on the cars, you see. They've got a supply and demand economy, and things are really jamming. It's great. People are working hard. It's a festival of pent-up entrepreneurial spirit when you go through Eastern Europe these days. One of the things that charms me about Europe is the ethnic variety, the diversity that you enjoy. When you just travel like from here to Portland, obviously it's a whole different culture, a whole different language, a whole different heritage. Well, it's not here. In Europe, that far it is, okay? You'd think when Europe is uniting, it threatens that beautiful ethnic variety. And the fact is, it does not. As Europe unites, I can make the case that the ethnic variety is getting better. Because remember, in Europe, there's 3 loyalties: region, nation, and Europe. You ask a person from Munich, where are you from? He'll say, I'm Bavarian, or I'm German, or I'm European, depending on his generation and his outlook. Ask somebody from Barcelona, where are you from? He'll say, I'm Catalonian, or I'm Spanish, or I'm European, depending on his outlook, you see. When you go to city halls all over Europe, you'll see 3 flags: the regional, the national, and Europe. And that's the celebration of Europe these days. Now, throughout our lifetimes, the headlines have been filled by regions challenging nations. All of this Basque, Irish, Catalonian, Corsican terrorism and everything, it's separatist movements threatening national capitals. When I first went to Brittany, believe it or not, that's the Celtic part of France, on the west of France. It's not French, it's more like the Irish, but it happens to be part of France. Paris was so threatened by the Celtic people that if you were a parent and you named your child a Celtic name in Brittany, that child would lose its French citizenship. Laughable today, but just 20 years ago, that was the case. When I first started traveling in Barcelona, nobody could speak Catalonian or wave the flag or dance the Sardana dance. Now you go there and everybody's dancing the Sardana dance. And everybody is, you know, celebrating their ethnicity. Scotland has a parliament in Scotland now for the first time since 1707. What's the deal? London's no longer threatened. The small languages of Europe are actually thriving. More people are speaking Irish now than a generation ago. What's going on? The political national capitals are no longer threatened by their regions because the national capitals realize that they read the writing on the wall, their days are done. It's Brussels, it's Europe. And Europe is excited about the ethnic groups, not the national groups. I've got a friend who's an archaeologist in the Tyrol. He wants to renovate a castle. He's sort of like the Indiana Jones of archaeologists there. He's quite an interesting guy. He goes all the way to Brussels to get money for his adventure. He doesn't say, I'm doing something for Austria. He'll go home empty-handed. He says, I'm doing something for the Tyrol. The Tyrol ignores the modern national boundaries, and it's an ethnic region that has part of Italy, Austria, and Germany, the Tyrol. He gets money from Brussels because Brussels likes the ethnic regions. It's a fascinating sort of thing that's going on. You go to an ATM machine in Barcelona, and you see Catalonian first, the Catalonian colors. Spanish, Gallego, that would be northwest Spain, Santiago de Compostela. Euskara, that would be Basque, German, French, English, and everything else. Now, of course, if a person from Basque Country goes to Barcelona, they're going to speak Spanish. But no, Barcelona, out of respect to their underdog ethnic friends, are going to have their language on their ATMs, just like if a Catalonian person goes to Basque Country, they're going to find Catalonian on the ATM machines there. Do you see what I mean? There's a solidarity among all these little underdog ethnic groups that are thriving now because of the European Union. I was in North Ireland. I was impressed by how many travelers, tourists I met from Basque Country and Catalonia. Why on earth would that be? And then I remembered, oh yeah, they've got a kinship. They are victims of the tyranny of the majority. And that's why they would go up there and hang out with their brethren that way. And at the same time, on the city flag posts of the city halls in Ulster in Northern Ireland, I saw Israeli flags. What's the deal? Well, the people in Ulster are having a tough time because they were planted there by the bigger power, and they are settlers. Good or bad, it doesn't matter, they're settlers, and they can empathize with settlers in Israel who are having a tough time with their Palestinian neighbors. Consequently, you've got that sort of a sister city relationship or whatever with Ulster and Israel, just like the Basque and the Catalonian people are traveling in Ulster. So there is this whole sensitivity now as Europe is evolving and celebrating its ethnic minorities. Europe has an incredible internal Marshall Plan. That's part of the European Union. When you join the European Union, you are either a net giver or a net receiver with all the taxes. If you're a wealthy country, you give more than you get, and that money goes to the poor countries until they bring up the poor countries to the point where the poor countries are now net givers. When European Union first started, it was Portugal, Greece, and Ireland that were the net receivers. I remember there were absolutely no freeways in any of those countries a little while ago. Now they're rolling out freeways everywhere, and every time you see a new freeway in Ireland or Portugal or Greece, you see a European flag that says, brought to you by your European Union friends, which really means France and Germany, that want to have this big free trade zone with no weak links so they can really be strong economically. It's pretty exciting to see that. All over the new countries, you find money coming in. You go to Greece, I was just there a couple months ago, this huge bridge is built with European money going over the Gulf of Corinth. A few years ago, you had to take a ferry. It's European money. Europe is investing itself like you can't believe. $500 billion of infrastructure investment to create a futuristic transportation and communication infrastructure for the future. Our country's frustrated at them that they're not doing their share in the military spending, and they tell us, well, you seem to be enjoying it. And they invest that money in their infrastructure. I mean, little Norway is drilling the longest tunnels in the world to lace together isolated communities in the fjords. Denmark and Sweden have built this mammoth bridge lacing together Copenhagen and Malmo. You got the bullet train of the English Channel Tunnel taking you from Big Ben to the Eiffel Tower in 2.5 hours. That's just the tip of the exciting infrastructure iceberg. All over Europe, they're investing in their infrastructure like I can't imagine. Here's the new train station, the biggest train station in Europe in Berlin. Major train lines coming in at right angles, 6 different levels. I mean, it's breathtaking to see that. I was just in the train station in Munich, photographing trains coming into the station, actually photographing the birds squished onto the windshields of the trains as they came into the station. Those trains are fast. When I looked at that, I thought you'd wait all your life to see a bird squished onto a windshield here in Seattle. But Europe likes the concept of fast trains. Well, another aspect of the European Union is peace. In fact, Europe has managed to create this exciting free trade zone. They've created a cumbersome, almost laughable bureaucracy. But bottom line, everybody seems to be thankful for the European Union because they have done what they set out to do. They've overcome the risk that France and Germany will lead that continent to another devastating war, as it's done twice in the last century. Bottom line, the European Union now is so interwoven that you won't see another world war. That's exciting. Yeah. That is really exciting, and that's the triumph of the world, of the European Union. Now, today, we are a nation at war, and I am really haunted by the thought that I don't think America knows what the reality of a war is. Of course, if you've got a loved one or if you've lost a loved one in Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam, you know what a war is. But I don't know what a war is. I think our society in general doesn't know what a war is. Europe knows what a war is. Europe has ripped itself to shreds twice in the last century. Think about France in World War I. France, with 1/4 of our population, lost as many people as we lost in the entire Vietnam War, 60,000 people, in one day. And then it happened again next Tuesday, and twice again the next week, until by the end of World War I, half of all the men in France between the age of 15 and 30 were casualties. That's a war. And when Americans call French surrender monkeys, I want to interrupt, and I want to explain to them, you don't know what a war is. They do. They're not quite as quick to go to war as we are inclined to be. Later on, Europe had the technology to do aerial bombardments. It was so appalling, Picasso had to stop and do this great mural of Guernica, the first city that was the victim of an aerial bombardment. And if there is a national piece of art in Europe today for the European Union, it is this, because it reminds Europe what is the reality of a war. In 1947, in the rubble of a bombed-out Europe, Euro visionaries got together, and I can't imagine this. They must have got together, smart people with a vision who really cared, and they said, we've got to overcome this hell that we bring upon ourselves every couple of generations with these wars. We need to unite. We got to talk people into trading away sovereignty, and it's a tough sell if you're into a nation, to trade away real sovereignty to be a union. A union's nothing without people giving up real sovereignty. In a fitful evolution, it's very cumbersome and awkward. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. They have over 60 years created a union today. And it's something that is quite an exciting accomplishment, and the good news is that they will never again go to war as they have in the past. Now, when Europe looks at us, they see a trigger-happy, isolated empire, probably in decline. And when Europe looks at us, they look at us thoughtfully. Do you remember the day we called the world's attention to order as Colin Powell sat down in that grand hall in the United Nations and sold the war to us? In the United Nations, there's a giant copy of this mural above everybody as a reminder of the reality of war. Our government thought the day before Colin Powell was to make this address, it would make more sense to cover that up with drapes so nobody would see it. I couldn't believe it when somebody told me that, and I Googled it, and it's no doubt, it was there, it was in the paper, but no Americans really noticed. Europeans noticed, but our government didn't want us to know what a war is so we could run into a war. And that scares Europe. That offends our friends on the other side of the Atlantic. That's a problem. They look at us, and they see a nation with 4% of this planet's people spending as much as everybody else put together on our military. And they see an environment politically where you cannot get elected without promising more. They see a nation outvoted routinely in the United Nations 140-4 on issues that matter of desperate importance to the poor and struggling world. Go to the UN website, you see it. It's always 140-4 on anything that matters to the poor people. Who stands with us? Israel, Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. There's our coalition of the compassionate, enlightened ones, I guess, you know? And you can write off the United Nations as a group of loonies, but there is something wrong when we're outvoted 140-4. It's just not a pretty picture. We got to deal with the rest of the world. We've got military bases in 130 different countries on this planet. I've been around. I've seen it. I have seen it. I've seen embassies that are the biggest and most fortified and scary buildings in an entire country, and it's not unusual, it's routine. I've been to the embassy in Berlin. This is the old one. God help your business if the American embassy moves in on that street. The new embassy is so fortified they had to literally reroute traffic, and the entrance for the public is in a park. You go down in the park under the freeway, and then you enter into the embassy this way. But you know, I do not buy this business of the innocent civilian. I think it's a myth. There are no innocent civilians. If you pay taxes, you are a combatant. I'm a combatant. Every bullet that flies and every bomb that drops has my name on it. That's just an honest approach to things. And it could be a good bomb or a good bullet. Sometimes they're necessary. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying they're not. But I have to take responsibility for it. It's me that's paying for it, and you. When we torture somebody, I was in Europe when that broke. What's it like to be an American in Europe? And on every headline, on every Newsweek over there, you've got a full color picture of victims of our soldiers getting tortured. maybe you can write it off, but I had to rip off, it's a very interesting emotional experience for me. I've never reacted this way before. I had to rip it off of the magazine, fold it up, put it in my shirt pocket, and wear it right here for the rest of my trip. It was a painful thing to acknowledge the reality that this is my country doing that. Because that's what the rest of the world sees when they look at us, and it's important that we grow beyond that. Now, am I saying that Europeans don't like us? No. You're going to see this all over Europe, all over the world. But it doesn't mean anti-you. The ideals of America are still inspiring people all over the world. It's just they don't understand our aggressive foreign policy, our militaristic foreign policy. Do you need to wear a Canadian flag in your travels? No, absolutely not. If I was Canadian, I would. That's for sure. I'd buff it. I'd have lights around it. But if I'm an American traveling, I'm an American traveling, and it's never been something I've needed to hide. It used to be a plus, now it's not a plus, but it's not a negative. It's just me, all right? And I am an ambassador of goodwill in my travels. When you travel, I think that you've got to understand that people in Europe like American individuals. I just took 1,000 people to France. A lot of people are nervous about going to France. I asked all 1,000 of them on an email, how were you respected by the local people? Nobody complained. They like us. Now, a lot of people say, don't they remember what we did against the Nazis? Of course they remember what we did against the Nazis. I was just filming in Burgundy in France, in a charming little mom-and-pop chateau. And look, get out of my way when we're filming. The sun's going down, we got work to do. No, the aristocratic family that's been in that castle for generations said, we must stop and have a ceremony because we have an American film crew here working in our castle. And they brought out, with some ceremony, this beautiful 48-star American flag, the one they hoisted over their chateau on that great day in 1945 when they were freed by the American troops. Man, they said, you go home and tell your friends that we will never forget what America did with its heroics and its might and its belief in freedom and all that kind of stuff. Europe is always thankful for that. What about the communists? Yes, we beat the Soviet Union, and Europe understands that. There's no doubt about it. But I lament the fact that they no longer name their children Frankie and Johnny. Because I've got a lot of friends, a few years older than me, born in the late 1940s, named Frankie and Johnny, because their parents were so inspired by the greatness of America. The reality today is, if you're in marketing in Europe, one of your responsibilities is to comb anything that smells like America out of your marketing material. Because California used to sell, today it's the kiss of death in Europe. I was just in Washington, D.C., lobbying and doing all this kind of stuff, and these legislators are really concerned about the brand of America. It's the brand of America, and the brand of America needs a little work, and it can be fixed in a hurry. But right now they're waiting for that. Terrorism. There's always been terrorism, there always will be terrorism, and America is targeted in our lifetimes. It's just people on the, it doesn't matter what I think, but other people, if they look at us like an empire, they're going to treat us like an empire. Nobody ever just laid down their weapons and said, sure, empire, have your way with me. You got disgruntled people on the fringes that are going to do nasty things to you. Now, we wish they would line up in formation so we could carpet bomb them. That's an easy solution. But are you going to do that if you're angry with the empire? No, you're going to shoot in from the bushes like we did when we fought the British. You're going to be a terrorist. Anytime you hear the word terrorism these days, I think you owe it to yourself to kind of look at it hard, because they're using terrorism in so many ways these days. Domestic terrorism, narco-terrorism, this and that terrorism. It's just a fear tactic. Terrorism's way overrated. Yeah. So let's just think of the reality here. Half the world's living on $2 a day. The gap's getting worse. There's angry people out there. And they're not going to target Norway, I promise you that. I mean, they're going to target us. I'm not justifying, I'm just saying it shouldn't surprise you. Now, if you're wondering from a travel point of view, what's the risk? The risk is minuscule. Obviously, we are creatures of the media and we freak out if there's one little event. But I'm telling you, 12 million Americans go to Europe every year. 12 million Americans went this year, they'll go next year, they went last year. Bomb in Madrid, no Americans hurt or killed, tragic thing. 12 million Americans go, 12 million Americans come back. The year before, bomb in London, terrible thing, 40 people die. 12 million Americans go, none hurt, 12 million Americans go back. Tomorrow, if an American is beheaded by a jihadist in Madrid, it doesn't change the fact that it is safe to travel. The media is going to take advantage of us and emotionalize it and hystericalize it, and most of us are going to freak out, and I think you're just encouraging the terrorists. You're part of the problem, frankly. I was in London when they had that terrible bomb in London. On day 2, they were back to normal, as a matter of principle, not being terrorized by the terrorists. Whatever happened to that? Well, it's not good for media. Sooner or later, a plane's going to go down, and we're going to go into this hysterical tailspin, and we're going to alienate the rest of the world, we're going to compromise our ideals, and we're going to freak out. Not remembering that every day that many people die on the freeways here, and it's not worth headlines. We're a mighty nation of 300 million people. People die. 70,000 people die on our roads every year. Anybody in that business would know if you drove 20 miles an hour slower, you'd save 20,000 precious lives. Are you going to drive 20 miles an hour slower to save 20,000 lives? Hell no. Screw those people. I got places to go. That's our attitude. I mean, in the honest truth, you go into a voting booth, are you going to vote to drive 50 miles an hour to save 20,000 people? No, and rightfully so, because we're a big nation of 300 million people and we got places to go. That's the reality. At least that's what we decide as a free, well-educated nation in our democracy. 15,000 people die every year in our country because of handguns. And you can make the case that that's a small price to pay for the precious right to bear arms that are so necessary. That's the notion, because we agree with that every year, year after year. We're a free, well-educated nation. We lose 15,000 people to have handguns. Europeans laugh out loud when they hear that Americans are staying home for safety reasons. If you care about your loved ones, you will take them to Europe tomorrow. And if you really hate terrorism, I think you'll realize the most important thing for us to do is to keep traveling, learn about the world, help them better understand us, and come home and help us better understand them. You know, I think it's so interesting how travel challenges truths you were raised thinking were self-evident and God-given. I just love the confusion it causes to me when I go somewhere else and I meet people who wouldn't trade passports. It really was off-putting at first. I got more wealth, more freedom, more opportunity than you'll ever have. And you wouldn't trade passports with me? Don't you have the American dream? You don't? You got the Bulgarian dream? You got the Latvian dream, the Moroccan dream, the Sri Lankan dream? Yeah, people have the Sri Lankan dream. It's a beautiful thing. I celebrate that because I've seen them and I know how exciting their dream is. I was raised thinking the world is a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to get there. And until well into my adulthood, I believed if they couldn't figure that out, we really, because we care, had every right to go in and elect a government for them that did get it correct. And now I've learned that one of the most ugly things you could possibly do as a nation is write another nation's textbooks. And I think you'd be appalled if you knew how many textbooks we're writing in nations that don't have the American dream. It's ugly, frankly. When you travel, you realize that different proud people have different struggles. And it's inspiring. I was in Turkey once, driving around in the eastern part of Turkey. In eastern Turkey, as a tour guide, you don't have a list of sites. It's a cultural scavenger hunt. You see 300 kids in a stadium singing and thrusting their fist up in the air. You stop and you go inside and you see what's going on. They're thrusting their fist up in the air, screaming and all in unison, "We are a secular nation. We are a secular nation." Oh, I asked my tour guide, what's going on? Don't they like God? No, we love God here in Turkey, but we're very concerned about the fragile and precious separation of mosque and state in our country. I didn't know they have a separation of mosque and state. I didn't know their constitution requires that the military overthrow the government if it ever becomes a theocracy. This is heady stuff that Americans generally don't appreciate. And you go over there and you realize they're waging some pretty cool struggles, some pretty valiant struggles. You got to remind yourself, every year on this planet, 5 languages go extinct. And that means 5 heroic little nations lose their struggle and die. I was raised so proud of Nathan Hale and Patrick Henry and Ethan Allen. Remember guys that could only wish they had more than one life to give for their country? And I've traveled and I realized Patrick Henrys and Nathan Hales are a dime a dozen on this planet. It's not a bad thing, it's a great thing. Every ethnicity has its own Nathan Hales. And every year 5 of those groups die. No headlines, they just get weaker and weaker and weaker until that last person who speaks that language dies, and one little bit of less ethnic diversity on this beautiful planet. It's a sad thing. And what's impressive to me is we think that other nations don't have the spine that we've got. That's what's scary to me. They got as much spine as we do. Why would they have less spine than us? And as a matter of fact, you could make a very clear case that they should have more spine than us, because we're so soft and we're into our red coat stage rather than the revolutionary stage. They've got the spine. It's going to be a tough fight. They're not just going to roll over like shock and awe and the war's over. There's going to be people with spine that believe differently than we do. Archbishop Oscar Romero. There's a Nathan Hale and an Ethan Allen for his people in El Salvador. I went down there on the 25th anniversary of his assassination. There's a life-changing travel experience. Life-changing. I could have hung out in Mazatlan. I decided to go down there, eat rice and beans, get covered with bug bites, and march with those people and remember their Nathan Hale. If you don't know about Oscar Romero, learn about him. He's an inspiration. And in El Salvador, we went to the monument that looks a lot like our Vietnam monument, and all the people killed fighting the United States in that little country of 3 or 4 or 5 million people. I'm not saying they're right and we're wrong. I'm just saying there's real struggles going on, and there's people that disagree with us, and they're not wrong just because they disagree with us. There's diversity and there's pride on this planet that you can't imagine unless you have the opportunity to travel. I was in Afghanistan once, and I tell you, it was a powerful experience. It's so strange to find nobility in people that are supposed to be your enemies. I was sitting in a cafeteria, just minding my own business like backpackers do when they're in Kabul. And a local man sat next to me. He said, "Can I join you?" And I said, "You already have." And he said, "You're an American, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I'm a professor here in Afghanistan, and I want you to know that 1/3 of the people on this planet eat with their spoons and forks like you do. 1/3 of the people eat with chopsticks, and 1/3 of the people eat with fingers like I do, and we're all just as civilized." Ooh, he had a chip on his shoulder about this, and he wanted to make a point with me. I thought, okay. And I left Afghanistan. I was traveling through South Asia, and I thought about it a lot. And I went to fancy restaurants filled with professional, local, well-dressed people with no silverware. Ceremonial sink in the middle of the room. People wash their hands and celebrate using the opportunity to use their fingers for what God made them for, to eat, to give them nourishment. And I got quite comfortable with that. It became really natural. And I had to be retrained when I got home. But the point is, there are proud people that eat with their fingers. This is just so fun to respect that and celebrate it, and to realize in our travels, people have different passions for different things. When you travel around, we don't have a lock on freedom. Life's not precious to us and cheap for them. It hurts me to hear that. When I'm traveling, I see beautiful things in Europe, and wherever I would travel, you'd see the same sort of magic, that beautiful fabric of a local community. In Italy, they have festivals where they teach the kids how to make ravioli, just to keep that element of their culture vibrant. It's a beautiful thing. In France, the Chamber of Commerce thinks it's worth investing in an exhibit that helps people develop a good nose to appreciate the wine. Because having a good nose in France is a life skill worth cultivating. In Italy, they got these wonderful antipasto bars. Not a salad bar, an antipasto bar. All over Europe, they have small refrigerators, not because they don't have room for a big refrigerator, because they'd rather go to the market every morning, because they like to pay a little more for their bread to know who baked it. It's a different concept. It's not good for business, that's for sure. It's good for the fabric of their community, and that's a priority in Europe, at the expense of business. It's an interesting thing. When I try to analyze, I often try to analyze what's the difference between America and Europe. There's a fundamental difference here. We're all smart, well-educated people that love our freedom and our democracy. In America, we believe in government by and for the people through the corporations that we own. It's a democracy, but we want to have a good business environment so we can make money off the corporations that we own, and it's a nice idea. In Europe, they have it a little bit different. Government by and for the people, regardless of the interests of the corporations. Consequently, in Europe, they'll make laws that are flat out bad for business. You buy a car, you got to pay for how to dispose it. You see? They'll have carbon taxes there before we will here. Here, the law has got to be good for the business because we own the businesses. Get the government off our back. We don't want regulations. Let the corporations screw people that can't figure out how to make a loan because I own part of that corporation and I can profit from it. We're all taking advantage of each other in this interesting spiral as we get government off our backs and let people who own the corporations have their way with everybody else. I don't know what the balance is, but there's a fundamental difference between Europe and the United States in this regard, and it's fun to read about. It's really fun to read about. In Italy, they love their pizzas thin. We like our pizzas thick. In Portugal, they eat barnacles with their beer. I'll be there tomorrow. In France, they take good care of their geese. They force feed them 4 times a day, like that. And then they slaughter them and they eat the fat livers. Foie gras, yeah. That's illegal in Chicago. Again, I don't know what's right or wrong, but it's funny that in Chicago it's illegal and the English people travel in droves down to the Dordogne to enjoy that foie gras. Every time I spend a week in Dordogne, I need foie gras detox, I'll tell you. It's great stuff. So there's different values. But if all these people that are so moralistic about the poor geese in the United States understood what we put our chickens through, they wouldn't eat chickens either. Those chickens are raised in a cage, probably plucked at birth, pumped with hormones, never see the light of day. And these geese, I've been there on the farm. We filmed it. You'll see it coming up. It's a beautiful world for them. It's a muesli utopia until that terrible day when there's no more corn coming down their gullet. In Europe, men chase tourist women like dogs chase cars. It's not acceptable, but it's just this macho European thing to do. Can't justify it, but you can't change it. If you don't like it, go to Denmark. You'll probably miss Italy, all right? It's just a wild world down there in the Mediterranean. The biggest building in Europe is filled with flowers. Huge auction hall. The biggest building in our country is filled with airplanes. The English have this incredible ability to lay on beaches and pretend it's sunny. It's amazing to see that. I was in Helsinki once, and all these people were marching through the streets. I thought, wow, I've hit a riot or something like that. And then I realized it was the annual festival where the choirs all go to the steps of the cathedral. They have the massing of the choirs, and then they have this thing called Take Choral Music to the Pubs. And they break into small groups, and they go to every pub in town, and they sing them classical choral music. What an interesting way to push your favorite music. In Italy, they love their expensive red wine, and they also love their cheap, fill it up at the gas station wine. It costs €1 for a liter. That's $6 for a gallon of wine at a filling station in Italy. Local people get their table wine that way. For 1,000 years, pilgrims have hiked all the way from Paris to the northwest corner of Spain, Santiago de Compostela, and to be on that square and see the jubilation on the faces of those humble people with their worn-out shoes and their frayed pants and their frayed walking sticks, as they finally step on that scallop shell and look up at the Cathedral of St. James. It's enough to make you just cry. I don't know what's so beautiful about it, but these people, these pilgrims, have been doing this for 1,000 years, and it's just a celebration to be there with them. In Switzerland, they forgot to roll up their tubas. And all over Europe, all over the world, they have different solutions for different problems. How do you dispose your garbage? Well, here we pay a garbage man to pick it up. Over there, you pay more for the bag, and you put the bag out on the street, and it includes pickup. Just a different way to handle that problem. In Italy, they have a law where you have to wear a seatbelt, and your car makes terrible noises if you don't. So the Italians just have this little plug they put in there. A creative solution. The English drive on the other side of the road. It's not the wrong side, it's the other side. The British would say it makes more sense to approach traffic with your sword hand on the inside to defend yourself. That historically, they say, is why they drive on the left, we drive on the right. It's okay. Don't tell them they drive on the wrong side of the road. That bugs them. They don't like to hear that. It's the other side. We have stop signs in the middle of nowhere. They've got roundabouts. You don't stop, you wing into that roundabout, and you take off on the exit of your choice. It's a fun way to handle that challenge. In the Netherlands, instead of parking garages for cars, they have 4-story parking garages for bicycles. You take the train in, hop on your bike, and you pedal to work. We don't like junk mail. They don't like junk mail either. What they do is have a solution. They put a decal on the mailbox that says no or yes. That's not that complicated. A simple no or yes. And most people Say no. No junk mail, please. Well, of course, prostitution is something that doesn't go away, is it? We've got it in our society, and it brings people down. It's a horrible thing, as if we can legislate it away. In Europe, they've realized you can't legislate morality. You can't make a law that says people have to be moral. You can make a law that says you can't hurt other people, but they've given up trying to legislate morality. It's just a sort of an enlightenment they've got that they think we could learn from. I don't think anybody says prostitution is good. I just think people acknowledge it's not going to go away. Why don't we regulate it? Why don't we take the disease out of it? Why don't we tax it? Why don't we give the prostitutes a union? Why don't we have a red light district where when the prostitute gets in trouble, she can push her emergency cord and a pimp doesn't come to bail her out, but a policeman does? That's the ideal in the Netherlands and in countries where they have legal prostitution. It's an ugly scene for most people, but it's an attempt to take the disease and the crime out of it. It's not foolproof, but they're trying to deal with a persistent problem in a creative and a pragmatic way. Here is a pragmatic solution for a problem that all of us have dealt with in the past, perhaps. When kids graduate, they get drunk, and some of them die on the roads. Ann and I have a girl that's graduating this year, and like any parents of a senior, we're worried about this. In Scandinavia, the kids graduate and none of them die on the roads because the parents pay for the keggers. Every time when you go to Scandinavia in May and June, the streets are noisy with these kids just having a wild time in the back of flatbed trucks, hollering their heads off, drunk as can be, going from parent to parent, drinking beer. Now the fact is, the parents in Scandinavia would rather have their kids not lie to them. They want to provide a driver. They want the kids to have a great time and not kill themselves. That's a tough sell for Americans who are much more scared about kids drinking alcohol. But of course, Europe is different than that, and I think they lose a lot less kids in their kind of love than we do with our kind of love. Again, a humbling, different approach that might not be saleable here, but it works well for them. I was just in Zurich in Switzerland at Starbucks. I had to go downstairs to the bathroom, and I went into the bathroom, and it was all blue lights. Blue lights, what's going on? I couldn't find my veins. I couldn't shoot up. They don't want their junkies shooting up in their public bathrooms. Now, we don't have junkies shooting up in our bathrooms because they're all either in jail or dead. They've got junkies in Europe, and you see them on the streets, and it's off-putting, and a lot of Americans go, what an ugly situation. Why can't they get their act together? It's a different approach to drug policy. I've been really interested in this lately. I've learned a lot about it. I've talked a lot about it. I just think we are dealing with a persistent drug abuse problem in our country. It's a serious problem. We're throwing billions of dollars at it. We're ruining hundreds of thousands of lives by needlessly criminalizing things. Now, I'm not quite into, thank you. The idea of decriminalizing all drugs is something that's interesting to talk about, and a lot of smart people are in favor of that, but I'm what they would call an incrementalist. I would just think it makes sense to first stop the war on marijuana and deal with it as a health problem. But bottom line, a society that's enlightened would measure the effectiveness of its drug policy by a concept called harm reduction, rather than how many people do you lock up. We measure the effectiveness of our drug policy by how high do you drive the substance value in the streets up, and how many people do you lock up? That's because it's part of the system. Every day in New York, 100 people are arrested for marijuana. Usually at the end of the day, the policeman gets a couple of hours overtime because it takes that long to book them, and they get time and a half. So the policeman got that. They got more arrests on their market, and the kid's got a record now that he can't get a loan for college, and that's going to send him down the wrong road instead of the right road. It's crazy from a European point of view. But let's just talk about the hard drugs and the needles here. When you go to that restroom you can't shoot up, what are you going to do then? Well, across the street, there is a machine that used to sell cigarettes. Now it sells syringes, government subsidized, 3 syringes for €2, less than $1 a piece. It's clean. It's not criminal. It's compassionate. And then you go down the street to a heroin maintenance clinic, and you get your fix. You get your counseling. You get a nurse to help you out. You get back off of welfare and into the employed workforce. In the United States, we lose 18,000 people a year to heroin overdoses. 18,000. In Europe, they lose 8,000. They handle it differently. No easy solution. They've tried and failed with all sorts of things, but they're dealing with it creatively. They're talking about it. They're compassionate. They're pragmatic. They want to take crime out of the equation so they can see it for what it is. It's a health problem for mixed up people who are screwing up their lives because they're addicted to heavy drugs. When you go to the Netherlands, when you go all over Europe, you find that things are more casual about marijuana. In Europe, they've got a pretty strict line. There's soft drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana, and there's hard drugs. And, nobody's saying drugs are good. It's a serious problem here. It's a serious problem over there. They're dealing with it different than we are. When you think about marijuana, a joint in Europe is about as exciting as a can of beer. Okay? It's just not anything anybody's going to freak out over. You go to the Netherlands, you find these coffee shops with Rastafarian flags and all sorts of little symbols that mean that there's no coffee on sale in that building, all right? You got people hanging out, having a lazy time, listening to cool music, lots of brownies for sale, lots of munchies. You got loaner bongs, you can check your email. You got older people parking their bike, getting a baggie to go because they don't like the edgy vibe there in the coffee shop. The menu looks like a drug bust. It's an incredible thing. And for 15 years, they've been, quasi-legal. It's not really legal, it's just decriminalized. But it's an attempt to be smart about drugs. And when you go to the Netherlands or when you go around Europe, you'll learn about their drug policy. And I learn about it by talking to policemen and reading websites and so on. In the Netherlands, you've got a 15-year track record now of not arresting people for marijuana. The police like it. The drug enforcement people know that it is not a gateway drug. First of all, more people don't smoke just because it's legal. In America here, there's a fear that there's a whole reservoir of people that just wish they could ruin their lives with drug abuse if only it was legal. This is laughable. 40 million Americans smoke pot recreationally. If you want marijuana, you can certainly get it. It's pretty hard to get arrested in a white suburb. If you're poor and black, you can get arrested in a hurry with marijuana. It's a racist policy. It's an economic discrimination against lower class and people who really need a job and who need a loan and so on. Now, when you think about marijuana, you got to remember 800,000 people are arrested every year in our country for marijuana. 80,000 people are in jail today for smoking marijuana. Because I'm outspoken in this, I get to talk to a lot of people whose spouses are in jail. It's screwing up their family. It's very expensive for our system. There's a whole organization of retired police people called LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I said retired because you can't speak about it until you're retired. Judges, policemen, advocates, and so on, once they retire, they can talk common sense about this. It's a very interesting thing. The King County Bar Association is famous in the United States as a leader in progressive drug policy issues. And they send their lawyers all over the country talking some common sense about drug policy. Here in Seattle, we're sort of a leader that way. That's why the ACLU has done this video with me here in Seattle. And we're running it on TV, and you can download it on Comcast if you like. But this whole marijuana thing is interesting, and you got to just remember, in Europe, they've learned that a society has to make a choice: tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. And the law needs to be revisited. Just like courageous people stood up in the 1930s to say this prohibition against alcohol is causing more problems than the problem it's trying to solve, right? When they finally said legalize alcohol, they didn't say booze is good. They said the law is counterproductive. And that's where we're coming to today. It's a fun thing to learn about. If you're curious about it, please take the initiative and check out some more stuff on that. All right, I'm just going to wrap things up here pretty quick, but I want, it's so interesting when you travel, is you find people have a different approach to government. In our society, we have an alternative, two choices: big bad government or little good government. And in Europe, there's a third choice called big good government. Big good government. It sounds laughable, but in Europe, when you are paying taxes, you expect to pay high taxes and you want results for those taxes. Big good government. The woman who's the president of Helsinki has like 70% approval rating. She just started her second 6-year term, and it's one of the most highly taxed parts of Europe. They love it. They're happy to pay their taxes. You don't find people moping about their taxes because they have a certain baseline of decency for their society, and they want to do well as a society. Now, they don't have the ethic of charity that we have here. We go to auctions, we do all sorts of good things that way. You don't see that in Europe. People pay high taxes and they want the government to solve it. And it's not perfect, it's their approach to this. It's just very different. When I go to Europe, I find, especially in Scandinavia, the most highly taxed, most socialistic part of Europe, on the main square you don't find a church with a spire, you find a city hall with a bell tower. It's very interesting. You step inside, you have a nave. secular nave. You don't have a pulpit, you got a lectern. You got a mosaic mural here, not celebrating great Bible stories, but celebrating heroic individuals that contributed mightily to their community. That's the socialism you find in Scandinavia. It's in their ethic. They live together. They don't want 1,000 points of light. They want one compassionate, well-organized searchlight from their government, ideally. Now, it doesn't work all the way, that doesn't work as they planned, but that's their ideal. And that was Copenhagen, that was Stockholm, this is Oslo. And you find those grand city halls. I've got friends in Switzerland that I love to talk to. This is Ollie. You've met him on my TV shows, maybe. And he's a school teacher in this little village. And he's my sounding board. Remember once asking Ollie, I said, Ollie, how can you Swiss people so docilely pay such high taxes? And without missing a beat, he said, well, what's it worth to live in a society where there's no homelessness, no hunger, and where everybody's got access to quality health care and education? It's just their ethic. It's just their ethic. I mean, it's a fascinating outlook that they have, and they've got it figured out. And you talk to these people, and it's just how they want their society to be. In the United States, we're good people. We have big hearts. We're compassionate. But I think we have a tough time understanding the gap between the wealthy and the desperately poor. We're conveniently blind to it. I mean, when you think about Katrina, the big shock of Katrina wasn't the fact that there was poor people, but it was the fact that we didn't realize that when you pull off this cover, you got all that unfortunate stuff in the underclass of our society. A successful society can deal with that in a constructive way. When we are learning about the world, we learn that half of the people on this planet are trying to live on $2 a day. 1 billion people are trying to live on $1 a day, and it's getting worse. When you think about the average lot of women on this planet, it is to walk for water and walk for firewood hours a day. People that would love to be parents, people that would love to take care of their children, but they have something more fundamental they have to do. I'm telling you, from my experience, even if you're motivated only by greed, if you know what's good for you, you don't want to be filthy rich in a desperately poor world. I've seen it. It's not a pretty picture. You don't want to live in a community like in Central America where there's an armed guard on every street corner, where everybody's got their front yards fortified like this. You don't want to live in a community where every rich house has to be built with speed bumps in front of it, so angry people have to slow down before they throw an explosive into your yard. You don't want to live behind designer fortifications. And I'm telling you, it's coming our way. My European friends tell me the hottest thing in real estate here in the United States is gated communities for the wealthy and prisons for the poor. That's the symptom of a society that has to take a hard look at things. And again, even if you're only motivated by greed, it's not where you want to go. You don't want your kids growing up that way. And I've seen it in desperate parts of this planet, and it inspires me to come home and blow a whistle. A lot of people told me, wait till you have kids, then you'll get real. We've got 2 precious kids, and it makes it even more poignant because I know these girls here living on a dump anywhere in the developing world are just as precious as my little girl. And our Jackie's got $5,000 for braces and money left over for whitener. Because I want her to have straight teeth and white teeth, and I don't apologize for that. I'm in a winning system here. I work hard, I'm productive. I can get my girl straight teeth and whitener. I looked around and I realized every kid in her class has the wherewithal to get $5,000 together for straight teeth and whitener. There's enough money. Don't let anybody tell you there's not enough money. There is enough money. Our government just spent $5 billion to send weapons to Colombia so they can fight a drug war in one country to fight drugs. Crazy is right. I was in Washington, D.C. with Bread for the World trying to let them know that if you spend $5 billion working on third world debt and water and immunizations, you wouldn't need a defense anymore. Everybody else would take care of us. It's amazing what we could do. Well, our country is confronted by some pretty serious challenges these days. I mentioned earlier, it's this fear thing. I mean, we got to deal with this in something other than fear. Fundamental Islam. I've been there. I don't find it that scary. We don't need to be afraid of Islam any more than we need to be afraid of fundamental Christianity. I think we need to be afraid of fundamentalism, frankly. Of course, when we think about challenges confronting our nation, there's global warming. I was just hiking in the Swiss Alps, and my friend told me now when you build a ski lift in Switzerland, you have to plummet for snowmaking, because they just have to make snow all the time, or they won't have a ski industry. Global warming is here. It's here, and it's here every year with a vengeance, I would say. Of course, we got the reality of a billion people trying to live on $1 a day. We were so compassionate during the tsunami, weren't we? Didn't we pat ourselves in the back to see our helicopters dropping those K rations on those people? Beautiful thing. I guess it was a beautiful thing. But every week since then, there has been a tsunami worth of children dying, 225,000 people for easily avoidable diseases. If we took 10% of our military budget and cared about people with it, we'd still have a military budget bigger than everybody else put together, and we'd be able to do something about that. But it wouldn't enrich local people by buying their weaponry. That's a radical concept right there. We could change the world if we wanted to, if we just got hip to our power when it comes to real desperate people that don't happen to sit on oil above their little hovels. You know, I've been thinking about this. What is the deal? Well, we've got to address these problems, and how we address them is shaped by our worldview. And our worldview is shaped by a very interesting grab bag of influences. We've all got a different approach to these problems because we all have a worldview shaped by our life experience. My mom's worldview is shaped by her husband. My sister's worldview is shaped by support our troops. My neighbor's worldview is shaped by a potent cocktail of fear and patriotism. My uncle's worldview, what's good for his investments. All of our worldview, to a great extent, is shaped by commercial television and this commercial sort of push in our society. I'm very thankful that my world is shaped to a large extent by my travels. I've been fortunate enough to travel, and as a travel writer, I like to bring that home and give other people the chance to learn from my travels vicariously through my writing and speaking and so on. The value of travel is nothing new. 1,500 years ago, Muhammad said, don't tell me how educated you are, tell me how much you've traveled. Thomas Jefferson traveled, and he wrote that travel makes a person wiser, if less happy. That's a concept. Mark Twain traveled. I love how Mark Twain traveled, and he came home and he wrote that travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. I've traveled a lot, and boy, I've had so much fun traveling. And I was thinking about a way to kind of sum up the value of travel to me. And let me just take you to close to a Turkish village. One of these beautiful little villages on the far east of Turkey. And a little montage of experiences. First, I get to go to a wedding. And there's the whole community gathered, and the old people there look at the young bride and groom, and they say this local blessing, may you grow old together on one pillow. It's a beautiful concept. I leave the wedding, and I'm walking down the street, and I'm just put off by my Turkish friends that have these ugly, unfinished buildings with all this rusty rebar. And I think, why can't you people get your act together and just finish these buildings? And then I learned that in Turkey there's an ethic among parents that you leave your children with a home, a physical home. And every parent, even poor parents, try to do this throughout their lives. And Turks know you don't put money in the bank because it disappears through inflation. You invest it in a little bit of a building. Every time you get $100, you put it into that building, and you leave that rebar there for the next $100 when you can make another wall, put on a window and on a door, and more rebar. Now when I look at that rusty rebar, I just remember what the Turks say, rebar holds the family together. Whoa, talk about a little enlightenment about that. Go down the street further, a little boy is playing an eagle bone flute, just like in biblical times, carved out of an eagle bone. He's playing his flute. And then I listen and I hear another eagle bone flute, out of sight, over the hill. And his dad is up there with the sheep. As they have for centuries, the dad and the boy, knowing they're each there, the mom's over here, the man's taking care of the sheep, and so on. It's a gorgeous community. Later on, I go down to a woodcarver's workshop with my tour, and we gather around his shop. He's never seen an American, and now he's got 15 of us gathered around his table. And he's famous in that corner of Turkey because he's a great woodcarver, and everybody wants a prayer niche in their mosque carved by this man. And he's working away and showing off, and he's puffed up, he's very proud, and suddenly he stops, and he holds the chisel high into the sky, and he declares, a man and his chisel, the greatest factory on earth. Wow. He doesn't need me to tell him what fulfillment's all about. Later on, I asked him, can I buy a piece of your art? And he says, for a man my age to know that my work will go back to the United States and be appreciated, that's payment enough. Please, take this home with you and remember me. Ooh, that's nice. Later on, we go to the mayor's house with our group. And anytime there's a large gathering in Turkey, you bet there's dancing and music going on. They turn on the music, everybody's dancing, shake your shoulders, snap your fingers. And then the mayor comes over to me, the tour guide, and he wants to show off. And he says, come over here. And he says, I have in the most sacred place in my home, my Quran bag. This is where I keep my Quran. And in my Quran bag, I also have a copy of the Torah and a copy of the Bible. Because by my estimate, we're all people of the book, children of one great God. A beautiful concept, a beautiful notion there on the eastern fringe of Turkey. Later on, we are wanting to be with the whirling dervish as he meditates and whirls. And you know, all the tourists know about this from the cruise shows and so on. But there was a dervish there, a monk, a follower of Mevlana, who's sort of a prophet of love, kind of a St. Francis, I suppose, of the Muslim faith. And he says, you can watch me get into my meditative trance and my prayer, but I want you to understand what I'm doing before you watch me. So we climb up onto his roof. The sun is setting. And he says, for us, when we pray, we put one foot into our community, anchored in our home. The other foot goes around like this, acknowledging the wonderful variety of God's creation, all corners of this great world. I raise one hand up to acknowledge the love of our God, our Creator. And the other hand goes down like a teapot, and it showers the love of our Creator onto all of His beautiful and His beautiful creation. And he whirls like this, getting into a meditative trance. And I look at him going around, and I look at his robe billowing out, and his head tilting over. And I think, there's a man, acknowledging the greatness of God, a man that is so different from me, but actually so much the same. And I think if I can just take that home, that understanding of the fundamental oneness and at the same time the beautiful diversity on this planet, that is my most treasured souvenir. And when we take home with us that understanding, and then when we use that understanding here as citizens in this greatest democracy on this planet, that makes travel a political act. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, thanks. Thanks. All right, thank you.